My name is Kathleen Monroe. I am 68 years old, a retired librarian, and a woman who spent her entire adult life building a home where my only child would feel safe. I thought I had succeeded. That belief shattered 2 years ago. I am standing in my kitchen right now, the afternoon light spilling across the polished oak counters of my lakefront home. This house is worth $985,000. Every board, every pane of glass, every stone in the garden. I fought for all of it. The kettle hums on the stove, and I am wrapping my hands around my favorite white porcelain teacup with the thin blue rim. That teacup is the one thing I carried away with me the day my daughter told me to leave. The phone on the counter begins to ring. I glance at the caller ID, and my stomach tightens. Melissa. I let it ring twice. On the third ring, I pick up. Her voice is light, careful, almost sweet. Mom, I've been thinking. Maybe Grayson and I could stay at your place for a while. You wouldn't want that beautiful house sitting empty, would you? Her words hang in the air. I watch steam curl up from my tea and fade into nothing. I can hear her breathing, waiting for my answer. My mind doesn't stay in this kitchen. It pulls me backward, 2 years ago, to a different doorway. The air then was colder, the wind sharper. Melissa stood in front of me, her eyes hard in a way I had never seen before. In her hand was a crisp $10 bill. She pressed it into my palm as if it were a ticket out of her life. Go, Mom. Don't come back. Behind her, Grayson leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed. He didn't say a word. He didn't need to. His smirk told me everything. My time in that house, in their lives, was over. I had spent my last years paying off the mortgage on that home so Melissa could live without the burden of debt. I cooked dinners when she worked late. I helped her through her divorce before she met Grayson. I believed love and sacrifice were the same thing. That day, with that $10 bill in my hand, I learned they are not. The memory is sharp enough to cut. I can still feel the sting of the wind on my face as I walked down the front steps, clutching my single suitcase and that teacup wrapped in an old sweater. The street felt longer than it ever had before. The bus stop at the corner had no shelter, just a leaning pole and a torn timetable flapping in the wind. Back in the present, I steady my voice. You think I would let you and Grayson live here? She laughs softly, a sound that used to mean joy, but now sounds like calculation. It's just for a while, until we get back on our feet. You have all that space, Mom. I look around me, the wide windows facing the lake, the sunlight on the hardwood floors I laid with my own hands. The garden outside where the lavender is beginning to bloom. This place is more than space. It is proof that I could start again, even after being thrown away. 2 years ago, my daughter kicked me out of the house with $10. Now, after years of silence and lies, she wants to live in my $985,000 home. The same daughter who told me I didn't belong. I take a sip of tea. It is still hot enough to burn. I let that warmth travel through me before I speak again. Melissa, I say slowly, this house isn't empty. It's full of my life, and I intend to keep it that way. There is silence on the other end. Not the silence of thought, but the silence of someone who expected compliance and found a wall instead. My fingers brush the rim of my teacup, and I remember the cold porcelain against my hands the night I arrived at a rented room with nothing else to my name. I set the cup down and glance toward the lake. The water is calm, the way I want my life to remain. I know this conversation is only the beginning, But I also know one thing with absolute clarity. The woman who walked away 2 years ago is not the same woman answering this phone today. "Mom," she says at last, "we'll talk about this later." "No," I reply, and my voice does not waver. "We won't." I hang up. The kettle has gone quiet, and so has my heart. I left without looking back. There was no point. The door had already closed, both in the frame and in my life. In my right hand, I gripped the handle of a small, worn suitcase. Everything I could carry in one trip. In my left, wrapped in a faded sweater, was the white porcelain teacup with the thin blue rim. It wasn't worth much to anyone else, but it was the last thread tying me to the life I had built. The air outside bit at my cheeks as I stepped onto the sidewalk. I could still hear the faint creak of the front door shutting behind me. My breath rose in thin, uneven clouds as I walked toward the bus stop at the corner. The $10 bill she had pressed into my hand felt stiff in my coat pocket, like a cruel reminder of the price she put on me. By the time I reached the edge of town, the winter light had already started to fade. The motel was a 2-story building with peeling beige paint and a flickering neon sign that buzzed like an irritated wasp. The vacancy light was half lit, the no in front of it permanently dead. I stood there for a moment, the suitcase heavy at my side, before stepping into the stale, overheated lobby. The clerk barely looked at me. "Weekly rates cheaper," he said, sliding a registration card across the counter. I counted out my crumpled bills, careful to keep the $10 note separate. I wasn't ready to spend it. I didn't know why, but I couldn't let it go just yet. The room smelled faintly of industrial cleaner and something older, damp carpet that had never truly dried, maybe. The bedspread was a dull, patterned brown, threadbare in places. A single window faced the parking lot, where a semi-truck idled with a low, constant growl. I set my suitcase on the bed and unwrapped the teacup, placing it gently on the nightstand as if it were something fragile enough to shatter under the wrong kind of light. I filled the cup from the small kettle in the corner, the kind that never boiled water properly, just coaxed it into a tired simmer. As I sat on the edge of the bed, I held the cup in both hands. The porcelain was cool against my palms, but the steam rising from it curled around my face like a quiet comfort. In that silence, I saw my husband's face, soft eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses, the smile he would give me across the dinner table. I could almost hear the sound of his spoon tapping against the rim of his own cup after a meal. Those dinners had been the heart of our home, the three of us sitting together, passing dishes, talking about our days. I had believed that if I kept showing up, cooking, cleaning, holding everything together, my daughter would always see me as her anchor. I was wrong. The truck outside shifted gears, rattling the thin glass of the window. I pulled my coat tighter around my shoulders. It wasn't the cold of the season that made me shiver. It was something deeper, lodged in my chest and radiating outwards. Not the cold of winter, but the cold of realizing you no longer have a place in your own child's heart. I stared at the cup in my hands, the thin blue line circling its rim like a boundary. It struck me then, my life had no boundaries. For decades, I had let myself be poured out until there was nothing left, believing that was what mothers did. But now, sitting in that dim room, I wondered if I had confused love with surrender. The heater clicked on with a metallic thud, sending out air that smelled faintly of dust. I sipped the tea. It was weak, almost flavorless, but it was warm, and right then, warmth was enough. I placed the cup back on the nightstand and lay back on the bed, my coat still wrapped around me. The ceiling above was stained in one corner, a shadowed map of water damage from years past. I traced the lines with my eyes until they blurred. Somewhere in the parking lot, a car door slammed. Somewhere far away, my daughter was making dinner in the house I had paid off. In the kitchen, I had scrubbed until my hands were raw. I turned toward the window. Beyond the trucks and the cracked asphalt, the sky was a deepening blue, the kind that comes just before night takes over completely. I thought about the $10 in my pocket, the cup on the nightstand, and the life I didn't yet know I was about to rebuild. I didn't cry. Not then. I simply let the quiet fill me, as if it might hold me together until morning. 2 seasons passed after the night I promised the house I would never surrender myself again. Spring scented the rooms with lilac. Summer laid a bright coin of sun across the floorboards I had sanded by hand. I settled into a rhythm that felt like breathing. Morning tea, a walk along the lake, a list of small repairs that kept my body busy while my mind learned a new shape of quiet. The phone rang on a Tuesday just as the kettle clicked off. I recognized the number before the first ring finished. My daughter never changed it. For a moment, I watched steam rise from the spout and thin into the light. Then I answered. "Mom," Melissa said, her voice wrapped in cotton, soft, padded, careful. "We should get dinner. Talk as a family. Grayson can grill. Saturday works, right?" I rested my hip against the counter and looked out at the water. "Dinner," I repeated. "What is it you want to talk about?" "Family things," she replied, the smile audible. "We miss you. It has been too long." Guilt used to arrive on cue when she spoke like that. Now it stood outside the door, waiting for permission to enter. "How is work?" I asked, keeping my voice warm. "You were managing that boutique after the reopening. Are they treating you well?" A pause followed, thin as a paper cut, then a quick laugh that ended too soon. "Busy. You know how retail gets." She cleared her throat. "Anyway, do you still like medium rare? Grayson has a new marinade." The kitchen clock kept honest time. Her voice did not. "Busy," I said. "Which days are busiest for you now?" "Schedules shift all the time," she replied. "The market is strange this year. We can talk when you get here." Another bright laugh. "Make it at 6." I slid the window open an inch. Warm air moved in, smelling of cut grass and rain on hot stone. "Melissa," I said, "are you doing all right financially?" She exhaled through her nose, a sound people make when they wish a question would disappear. "You are worrying again. We are fine. We just want to see you. That is all." The last time she used that word, all, I handed her my remaining savings to help with a deposit. All had ended up meaning everything. I pressed my fingers to the window frame and felt the smoothness of the fresh paint. "I will come," I said. "Saturday at 6. "Good," she said quickly. Relief slipped through before she caught it. "We will make it nice." After the call, I opened the small ledger where I keep my household notes. The line where I record expenses was neat and reliable. The line where I record blessings was fuller than I expected. I wrote, "Saturday dinner. Bring nothing but patience." That evening, I trimmed lavender along the path and left a few sprigs by the sink to dry. I tried on a cardigan I had mended last winter, the same shade as the lake just after dawn. I did not dress for my daughter. I dressed for the woman who would sit across from Old Hurt and keep her dignity steady. On Friday, Peter stopped by with a box of nails and his shy half-smile. He checked a porch post that had shifted over the spring and tightened the bracket with quick, efficient turns. "House still treating you kindly?" he asked. "It teaches me to listen," I said. I did not mention the invitation. Peter respected borders. He could read a closed gate from a mile away. Before he left, he glanced at the cup on the drying rack. "Good tea," he said. "Strong enough?" I answered. Saturday arrived clean and bright. I placed my teacup in the cabinet, a small ritual that reminded me I would return, no matter how the evening went. On the way out, I picked a single lavender stem and tucked it into my pocket. The scent steadied me better than any speech could. Halfway to the car, my phone buzzed. A text from Melissa flashed across the screen. "Bring your peach cobbler. Grayson is excited." I stopped on the gravel and smiled at the ground. Melissa knew I never arrived empty-handed. She also knew I offered sweetness when the room was sharp. That habit had gotten me into trouble before. I typed slowly, "I will bring myself. That will be enough." 3 dots appeared, vanished, returned. "Sure, see you at 6. Driving into town, I passed the boutique where Melissa had worked. The front windows held a cheerful summer display, but a handwritten sign near the corner read, "New hours, staff shortage." A mannequin wore last season's dress. The hem was pinned with silver clips, as if someone meant to fix it and then forgot. At the final stoplight, I pressed my palm to my chest and breathed until the signal turned green. Memory rose like heat, not to burn, just to warn. I thought about the way Melissa dodged my questions, about the relief that broke through her voice when I agreed. There are patterns to a family the way there are rings in a tree. Each season leaves a mark, whether we count it or not. I pulled into her subdivision and felt the familiar tug in my throat. The hedges were taller. The paint looked newer. Yet I could still map the step where my suitcase bumped, the square of sidewalk where a $10 bill grew heavier than a stone. I parked at the curb and rested my hands on the wheel. This time, I would enter as a guest, not as a mother begging for a place. I could feel the difference all the way down to my bones. The morning after the call, I spotted Martha tending her roses along the low fence that marked the edge of her yard. She wore her usual wide-brimmed hat, the one with the faded ribbon, and gloves that had seen more seasons than either of us cared to count. I walked over, the gravel crunching under my shoes. She glanced up, reading my face before I spoke. "You've got something on your mind," she said, snipping a dead bloom and dropping it into her basket. I leaned against the fence post. Melissa called, invited me to dinner, said she wanted to talk about family matters. Martha arched an eyebrow. "And what does she really want?" I gave a half smile. "I'm not sure yet, but when I asked about her work, she dodged the question. I can feel something pressing on her." Martha set down her shears and peeled off one glove, wiping her brow. No, it's strange hearing you say that. My son did something similar a few years back. Came knocking after months of silence, talking about how much he missed me. I didn't see the signs until it was too late." "What happened?" I asked, though part of me already knew. She sighed, the kind of sigh that carries the weight of both anger and resignation. "He'd lost his job, moved into my house with his family, said it would be temporary. Within 6 months, I was the one sleeping on the couch in my own living room because they'd taken over the bedrooms. By the end of the year, they told me it would be better if I found my own place. Less crowded, they said." I felt the sting of recognition in my chest. "So, you left?" "I left," she said, plainly. slipping her glove back on. "And here's the part I want you to hear, Kathleen. I didn't slam the door when I walked out. I didn't scream. I didn't even take the spare key from their hook. I just didn't open my door to them again." I let the words sink in, watching her hands move with practiced ease among the roses. She went on. "People talk a lot about forgiveness, like it's a single act, one big moment. But sometimes it's quieter than that. Sometimes it's just not letting them back in to do it again." "Not letting them back in," I repeated, tasting the truth of it. Martha nodded, meeting my eyes. "We don't always need to slam doors, Kathleen. Sometimes we just don't open them anymore." Her voice was steady, but there was a softness underneath. She wasn't telling me to punish Melissa. She was telling me to protect myself. I thought about my lake house, the fresh floors, the lavender by the sink. I thought about the $10 bill that still sat in a small envelope in my dresser, a reminder of a day I had learned the price my own child put on my place in her life. Martha's cat, a plump, orange tabby, wandered out from under the porch and rubbed against her leg. She bent to scratch its head, then looked back at me. "You've built something for yourself. You've worked too hard to hand it over without thinking. If you decide to let her in, make sure it's because you want her there, not because you're afraid to say no." I felt a quiet resolve begin to form, like a knot tightening in a rope. "You're right," I said. "It's my choice this time." "That's the thing," she said, picking up her basket of clippings. "It's always been your choice. You just forgot for a while." I walked back to my porch, her words echoing in my mind. The breeze off the lake carried the scent of roses and damp earth. I stood for a moment, looking at the front door of my own house, the one I had painted a deep, welcoming blue. Martha was right. I didn't have to change the color. I didn't have to bolt it shut. But I could decide, quietly and completely, who crossed that threshold. And maybe that was all the power I needed. Melissa's driveway was spotless, the kind of clean that comes from someone wanting to impress before the first knock on the door. The house rose 2 stories, trimmed with crisp white shutters, its stone facade catching the last gold light of the day. On the surface, it looked like the life I once hoped she would have. Yet as I stepped up to the door, I felt no warmth drawing me in. Melissa opened it almost too quickly, as if she had been standing right there. "Mom," she said, her smile wide but rehearsed. She kissed my cheek and stepped aside. Inside, the rooms were dressed for a magazine spread. Neutral walls, gleaming floors, strategically placed vases. Everything matched. Nothing felt lived in. The scent of something roasted hung in the air, but it didn't curl into you like a memory. Grayson appeared from the kitchen, a wine glass in his hand. "Kathleen," he said, nodding. His voice was smooth but carried that faint edge of ownership, as if my name were just another word he controlled. He gestured toward the dining room. "Let's sit. Dinner's ready." We took our places at a long table polished to a mirror shine. Melissa poured me water, not wine, without asking which I preferred. She folded her napkin neatly and began talking about small things, how the weather had been unpredictable, how the neighbors had landscaped their yard. Her words circled around something, never landing. Grayson carved the roast with deliberate precision. He filled his own plate generously before passing mine. "You'll like this," he said. "We've been experimenting with new recipes. Melissa's quite the hostess now." I thanked him, though my appetite was nowhere near the plate in front of me. I watched Melissa steal glances at him before speaking again. So, Mom, we were thinking, with all the space you have at the lake house. She trailed off, glancing down at her fork. Maybe we could, you know, stay there for a while. I didn't respond right away. I reached for my water, taking a slow sip, letting the sound of the clock in the hallway fill the space between us. Grayson leaned back in his chair. "It makes sense," he said. "You're just one person in that big place. We could help keep it in shape. Make sure nothing happens while you're alone." The way he said alone, as though it were a weakness, was not lost on me. I set my glass down carefully. "I've managed to keep it just fine." Melissa's smile faltered, but she pushed on. "It's only temporary, Mom. Until we get through some things, you'd hardly even notice we were there." I studied her face. The careful makeup couldn't hide the tightness around her mouth, the way her eyes darted to Grayson as if to confirm her lines. I thought of Martha's roses, how she had said some blooms just need to be cut away before they drain the whole plant. "Tell me more about these things you're getting through," I said, my tone light but steady. Melissa blinked. "Oh, it's nothing you need to worry about. Just life." Grayson gave her a look that shut her mouth like a slammed book. "It's about sharing resources," he said. "Families do that. And you'd be helping your daughter." The last part landed with weight, meant to press on me, to trigger the reflex I had relied on for decades. Give, even if it costs you. I let the words settle in the room without moving toward them. I cut a small piece of meat and chewed slowly, my gaze moving from Melissa to Grayson and back. I could feel them watching for any sign that I might say yes, that the door might swing open. Instead, I dabbed my mouth with my napkin and asked about their garden. Melissa stumbled over her reply, surprised by the turn. The conversation wandered after that, light, inconsequential topics floating over the table, while the unspoken request sat between us, cooling like untouched food. I offered no decision, no opening. My silence was not empty. It was deliberate. When dessert was served, Melissa tried once more. "Think about it, okay? We'd be so grateful." I met her eyes and held them, not unkindly, but without promise. "I will think," I said simply. She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. Grayson topped off his wine and looked away. Driving home later, the taste of the meal faded quickly, but the looks, those calculated glances between them, stayed sharp. The lake greeted me in the dark, its surface catching the porch light. I unlocked my own door and stepped inside, the air instantly warmer than anything I'd felt that evening. And I knew warmth was not just a matter of temperature. The next morning, the sky hung low over the lake, the kind of pale gray that makes the water look like liquid steel. I had just finished pruning the hydrangeas along the porch when Peter's old pickup rumbled up the drive. He stepped out with that familiar, easy stride, holding a brown paper bag that I knew would be filled with fresh apples from his tree. "Morning, Kathleen," he said, offering the bag. "Thought you might like these." I smiled, brushing soil from my gloves. You always know when I'm in the mood for something sweet. We stood for a while, talking about the weather and the stubborn raccoon that had been breaking into his compost bin. It was only when his voice dropped, softer, that I realized this wasn't just a friendly visit. "I don't mean to pry," he began, "but I ran into Ed Collins at the bank yesterday. He mentioned something about Melissa." My hands stilled on the porch railing. "What about her?" Peter hesitated, as if choosing his words carefully. It sounds like she and Grayson are in a bit of trouble. Missed mortgage payments. Ed said the bank's been calling, and there's talk of foreclosure if they can't catch up. The air between us shifted. I heard the faint lap of water against the shore, the distant cry of a loon. But beneath it, a different sound rose inside me. The memory of a pen scratching across a check, the weight of an envelope pressed into my palm. Years ago, when Melissa first bought that house, she had called in tears. Grayson had lost a job. They'd fallen behind, and the bank was threatening to take it all. I'd gone to the branch myself, sat in a stiff leather chair across from Ed, and paid off the debt in full. Melissa had hugged me, promising they'd never forget what I'd done. But they had. Or maybe they'd chosen to. Peter must have seen the shift in my expression. "I'm sorry to bring it up," he said quietly. "Just thought you ought to know." I looked out at the lake, my fingers curling around the cool porch rail. "Thank you, Peter. I appreciate your honesty." He gave a small nod, sensing my need for space, and after a few more words about the apples, he left. His truck disappeared down the gravel road, leaving me alone with the water and my thoughts. I carried the bag of apples into the kitchen and set it on the counter. The smell of them, crisp, sweet, tinged with earth, pulled me back to when Melissa was a little girl, biting into one so big it hid her whole face. She'd giggle, juice running down her chin, and I'd wipe it away with the corner of my apron. I leaned against the counter, the weight of the years pressing on me. If I help, I thought, what am I really doing? There was a time when the answer would have been simple. Mothers help their children. That's the code we live by, the unspoken oath we carry from the moment we hold them. But now I'd learned that help could turn into a rope someone uses to pull themselves up, or a net they come to rely on so completely they never learn to swim. Melissa's voice from 2 years ago echoed in my mind. Mi Gigi, Junki Lainua. The way she had handed me that crumpled $10 bill, as though it was a mercy. The way Grayson had stood behind her, silent but satisfied. I pressed my palm to the cool ceramic of the blue-rimmed teacup on the shelf. That cup had been with me in motel rooms, in borrowed kitchens, on mornings when I wasn't sure where I belonged. It had held more than tea. It had held my resolve, my promise to myself that I would not let anyone else decide my worth. Helping now. Would it be an act of love? Or would it be undoing every boundary I had fought to build? I pictured Melissa opening the door to my lake house, her boxes filling the rooms, Grayson's voice carrying through the halls. And I knew. It wouldn't just be for a while. It would be until I was edged out again. The lake outside shifted with the wind, ripples catching the weak sunlight. I thought about Martha's words, about doors we don't need to slam, only keep closed. Maybe this was my door. By the time the kettle whistled for my afternoon tea, I had made a quiet decision. I would think. I would weigh. But I would not be swept into the current out of guilt or habit. Because love, I was learning, sometimes means letting someone face the cold water so they can learn how to swim. It was late afternoon when I saw their car pull into my drive. The sky over the lake was beginning to turn the pale gold of early evening, and the air carried that crisp edge of autumn. Melissa stepped out first, smoothing the front of her coat, her smile bright enough to look deliberate. Grayson followed, slower, scanning the property as if measuring it. "Mom, this place is beautiful," Melissa said the moment I opened the door. The photos you've sent don't do it justice. Grayson gave a low whistle. Quite the view. You've really got yourself a gem here. I stepped back to let them in. It's been good to me, I said simply. They moved through the rooms like guests at an open house, hands trailing along window frames, eyes lingering on details. Melissa paused at the mantel, touching the vase of dried lavender. Everything feels so peaceful here, she said. It took work to get it that way, I replied. In the kitchen, Grayson opened the back door and stepped onto the deck. That lake is worth half the value right there, he remarked, leaning on the railing. Bet you get amazing sunsets. Melissa slipped onto a stool at the counter, her fingers tracing the wood grain. We were thinking, Mom, if we stayed here, you wouldn't have to be alone. We could keep you company. I studied her for a long moment. Melissa, if this were your house, I asked, my voice steady, what would you do with me? The question landed between us like a stone dropped in still water. The ripples spread in the silence that followed. Melissa's lips parted, but no words came. She glanced at Grayson, who smirked faintly, as if the pause amused him. Finally, Melissa let out a small laugh that didn't sound real. Why would you even ask that? Because I want to know, I said. If the roles were reversed, if I came to you and asked for a place, what would happen? She looked down at her hands. It's different. Different how? I asked. Grayson closed the back door and came inside. She's your daughter. You're the mother. That's the whole point. The point, I said, is that I've been in that position before. I know what it's like to live in a house I thought was mine until it wasn't. Melissa shifted on the stool, the color in her cheeks rising. Mom, we're not trying to take anything from you. We just need a little help right now. Everyone has hard times. I understand hard times, I said quietly. I also understand what happens when help becomes expectation. Grayson leaned against the counter, arms crossed. You make it sound like we're here to push you out. That's not fair. I met his gaze. Fairness is something I've learned to measure differently. Melissa reached for my hand across the counter, but I didn't move to meet her. You've always been there for me, she said. I just thought that I would be there, no matter what. I finished for her. Her mouth closed, and the silence stretched again. Outside, a loon called across the lake, its cry carrying through the open window. This house is yours, Grayson said, his tone softening but his eyes still sharp. We're not asking for it, just a corner of it. I could feel the weight of the unspoken in the room, their financial trouble, the foreclosure notices Peter had mentioned, the way they hadn't been honest. And I could feel my own history pressing against my ribs, reminding me of the cold porch steps 2 years ago. If I gave you that corner, I said slowly, how long before it became the whole house? Melissa flinched just slightly and looked away. Grayson's smirk returned, but this time it carried a trace of something else. Annoyance, maybe, or recognition that I wasn't going to fold. We're family, Melissa said finally, her voice softer now, almost pleading. I thought of Martha's words about doors. I thought of the years I'd spent believing family meant giving until you had nothing left. And I thought of the view from my deck, the quiet mornings, the lavender by the sink, things I'd built without them. I'll think about it, I said, the same words I'd used at dinner. But we all knew thinking and agreeing were not the same thing. Melissa nodded slowly, her eyes darting toward Grayson as if to check his reaction. He just shrugged and moved toward the door. As I watched them leave, their figures framed by the last light of day, I felt the cool handle of my teacup waiting on the counter. And I knew I'd need its steady warmth to hold the line I was drawing. After they left, the house seemed even quieter than usual. The air still held the faint trace of Melissa's perfume and the sharper undertone of Grayson's cologne, but it was fading fast. I closed the door, turned the lock with a soft click, and let out a breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding. In the kitchen, I filled the kettle and set it on the stove. The steady hum of the flame was the only sound in the room. I reached up to the open shelf and took down my white porcelain teacup with a thin blue rim, setting it gently on the counter. Its familiar weight in my hands felt like an anchor. When the water boiled, I poured it over the tea leaves and watched the steam rise in pale curls, carrying the faint scent of bergamot. I carried the cup to the small table by the window and sat down, facing the lake. The water was calm, a glassy sheet reflecting the overcast sky. I held the cup in both hands, letting its warmth seep into my fingers. My eyes followed a lone duck gliding across the water, leaving a narrow wake behind. The world outside seemed to move at its own, unhurried pace, untouched by family dramas, unbothered by the weight of decisions. I didn't tell anyone what I'd decided. Not Martha, not Peter, not even the echo of my own voice in this house. The decision lived entirely inside me, quiet and absolute. I would not give up my home. I would not trade my peace for their convenience. There was a time when I would have said yes without thinking. A time when love, to me, meant giving everything, no matter the cost to myself. I believed sacrifice was proof of devotion, and I wore my exhaustion like a badge of honor. But the years had taught me a truth I wished I'd learned sooner. Love without respect is just exploitation. I took a slow sip of tea, the flavor grounding me. I thought of the night I left Melissa's house with that $10 bill in my pocket, the cold settling into my bones as I stood at the bus stop. I remembered the weeks in the motel, the peeling wallpaper, the smell of damp carpet. I remembered promising myself I would never be in that position again. And now, here I was, in a home I'd rebuilt with my own hands, looking out at a view that reminded me every day of what persistence could create. The idea of surrendering even a part of it to people who had once shown me the door felt like erasing my own name from the life I'd claimed. The lake shifted under a breeze, ripples catching the light. I traced the rim of my cup with my thumb. No, I said quietly to no one, the word barely louder than a breath. Not again. I imagined their faces if I told them outright. Melissa's would crumple into disappointment first, then harden into accusation. Grayson's would hold that half-smile he used when he thought he was being patient with someone foolish. They would say I was selfish. That family means helping each other. But I knew the kind of help they meant, help that cost me everything and left them with no reason to change. I had lived that pattern before, and I wouldn't step into it again. I finished my tea and set the cup down, the soft clink against the saucer sounding like a period at the end of a sentence. Outside, the duck had disappeared around the bend, the lake smoothing over its wake as if it had never been there. The house felt solid around me, each beam and board holding the memory of my work. This was my place now, not because I owned it on paper, but because I had claimed it in the quiet hours, sanding floors, painting walls, planting lavender in the soil. I leaned back in my chair and let my gaze rest on the horizon. I didn't need to announce my choice. I didn't need to justify it. It was enough to know that when the moment came, my answer would already be waiting. And it would be no. 2 mornings later, my phone buzzed on the table beside my tea. The lake was shrouded in a soft gray mist, the kind that made the shoreline disappear. I was halfway through slicing a pear when I picked it up. The message was from Melissa. "If you refuse, I will never speak to you again." The words sat there on the screen, black against white, each one sharp as glass. No greeting, no hesitation, just a verdict. For a moment, I stood perfectly still, knife poised above the cutting board. My first instinct was the same one I'd had for decades, to reach for an explanation, to smooth things over, to find a compromise. That old reflex rose in me like a tide, pressing at my ribs. But I stayed still and let it pass. I set the knife down and sat at the kitchen table. The phone felt heavier than it should, as though her message carried the weight of every past demand, every unspoken threat, every time love had been turned into a bargaining chip. Through the window, the mist shifted and revealed a narrow glint of water. I thought of the nights in that motel, when the wind rattled the thin window pane, when I wrapped my coat tighter around me and whispered that I'd never let myself be in that position again. Melissa's words weren't just a threat. They were an invitation to step right back into the same trap. I turned the phone over in my hand, its smooth glass warming under my fingers. I could already imagine her reaction to silence, anger, then disbelief, then a rush of calls and messages until she found another way to get what she wanted. I could also imagine my own reaction if I gave in. Resentment, exhaustion, and the slow erosion of the peace I had built here. No, I thought, not this time. I typed my reply slowly, each letter deliberate. I wish you the best. I stared at the words. They were short, almost gentle, but they carried a finality I had never dared before. They didn't invite negotiation or promise a future discussion. They didn't explain or defend. They simply handed her the outcome and left her to hold it. I hit send and watched the little arrow disappear into the ether. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then, the screen dimmed, and my reflection looked back at me, older, steadier, and maybe, for the first time in years, free. The kettle began to whistle. I rose, poured the hot water over the tea leaves, and let the steam rise against my face. Outside, the mist had thinned, revealing the lake's far shore. The world seemed wider than it had a minute ago. My phone buzzed again, 1, 2, 3 times, but I didn't pick it up. The sound barely touched me. Instead, I carried my cup to the porch, settling into the chair that faced the water. I thought about all the times I had bent myself into shapes to fit into someone else's comfort. All the times I had accepted the smallest corner of a life just to keep the connection alive. And I realized that every one of those times had chipped away at who I was, until I had almost disappeared. Not anymore. The lake's surface rippled as a breeze passed over it. Somewhere, a heron lifted off with slow, powerful wings. I sipped my tea and let the warmth travel through me. The decision I'd made was more than about a house. It was about the rest of my life. If Melissa meant her words, if she truly never spoke to me again, then perhaps that silence would be better than the noise of constant disrespect. It was a loss, yes, but not a hollow one. It was space, and space could be filled with something better. The phone buzzed again. I glanced at it on the table beside me, but didn't reach for it. Instead, I leaned back, the porch boards creaking under my weight, and breathed in the scent of damp earth and cedar. There was no anger in me now, only a quiet certainty. I had returned her threat with a blessing, and I had meant it. Whether she took it as defiance or as love was hers to decide. I had chosen my part. I took another sip of tea and let the silence settle around me. It didn't take long for the ripples to spread. Melissa's silence lasted only a few days before the first whispers reached me. Through cousins, through old neighbors, through the fragile web of family connections that never truly breaks, no matter how frayed. She had started calling relatives, acquaintances, even former coworkers, spinning her version of the story. She said no, Melissa would tell them, her voice wounded, even though she has plenty, even though she's living in that big lake house all by herself. What kind of mother turns her back on her child? I could picture it, her head tilted just enough to invite sympathy, her tone careful, as though the only possible explanation was my selfishness. And because not everyone knew the full story, some people believed her. One afternoon, I ran into my cousin Carol at the market. She hesitated before greeting me, her eyes flicking toward the basket in my hand, almost as if she was assessing whether I looked like someone hoarding her blessings. I smiled and asked about her grandkids, but I could feel the chill under her words. I didn't try to defend myself. I'd learned that explanations offered under attack often sound like excuses. Instead, I went home, brewed tea in my porcelain cup, and let the sting pass through me like wind through the pines. But Melissa's campaign didn't stop at whispers. When she failed to get money from relatives, she turned to friends and acquaintances of Grayson's. That, too, went nowhere. The more doors that closed, the more frustrated she became. And when frustration curdles, it seeks an outlet. That outlet was me. One Sunday, I attended a small gathering at the community hall, a potluck organized by the women's group. As I set down my dish, I could feel a few heads turn. A couple of women gave me polite nods, but quickly looked away. Others didn't hide the disapproval in their eyes. I didn't have to guess where it came from. And then, just as I was considering slipping out quietly, Martha walked in. She spotted me across the room and made a beeline, her steps brisk, her eyes fierce. "I heard some things," she said under her breath. "Stay. Close." When the meal began, Martha sat beside me. She kept her conversation light, asking about my garden, about the lake's water level this year. But when one woman at the table made a pointed comment, "I just think family should help family, no matter what," Martha's demeanor changed. She set down her fork and looked the woman square in the eye. "You're right," Martha said, her voice calm but edged with steel. "Family should help family. Kathleen has been doing that her whole life. She gave and gave and gave, paid debts, offered shelter, forgave insults. And what did she get in return? The door slammed in her face. Twice. The table went quiet. Martha leaned back slightly, still holding the woman's gaze. "She's earned the right to keep something for herself. That lake house? That's not greed. That's survival." No one spoke for a moment. Then someone else cleared their throat and changed the subject. But I noticed how a few women at the table looked at me differently, less certain, more curious. After the meal, as we packed up dishes, Martha squeezed my arm. "Don't let them make you the villain in a story you wrote with kindness," she murmured. "You have the right to your own ending." Her words settled in me like a steadying hand on the shoulder. For years, I had thought of love as a river that must always flow outward, no matter how low the source ran. Martha reminded me that even rivers have seasons, and sometimes they must replenish before they can give again. Over the next week, the hostility around me shifted. Some people still kept their distance, but others reached out quietly. An extra wave from a neighbor, a short note in my mailbox that said, "I understand." It wasn't a flood of support, but it was enough to remind me I wasn't entirely alone. Melissa, however, stayed silent. I suspected her silence now had more to do with pride than distance. She'd tried to rally the crowd and found that the crowd was smaller than she'd hoped. One evening, as the sun dropped behind the trees and the lake turned gold, I stood on the porch and thought about Martha's defense of me. The words she'd chosen weren't about blame, they were about truth. And the truth had a way of standing on its own, even when others tried to bury it. I knew there would still be moments ahead where Melissa's absence would ache. But I also knew that I'd rather face those moments in the peace of my own home than in the chaos of a life where I was always at someone else's mercy. The mist began to rise from the lake again, curling into the cool evening air. Somewhere in the distance, a loon called. I lifted my cup of tea, feeling its warmth seep into my palms, and whispered to myself, not as a defense, but as a quiet fact, "I've already given enough." The morning began with a sky so clear it looked polished. The lake outside my window was still as glass, mirroring every pine and drifting cloud without a single ripple. Days like this always made me want to work in the garden. I slipped on my gloves, grabbed my tools, and stepped into the cool air. The lavender along the path had thinned over the past year, so I decided to plant more. The soil was dark and rich from the compost I'd been adding, and the scent of damp earth rose up with each turn of my trowel. Working in the garden always felt like mending something invisible inside me. Every weed pulled, every root tucked in. It was as if I was restoring order not only to the land, but to my own thoughts. As I worked, I could hear the slow hum of bees visiting the rosemary bushes, their persistence a gentle reminder that life goes on, quietly and without permission. I thought about how, for so many years, my energy had been poured into people who didn't always see it. Now, it flowed into spaces that gave back, even if only with blooms and fragrance. Around mid-morning, I took a break on the porch. A small stack of mail sat by the door. Most of it was the usual: flyers, bills, a magazine I never remembered subscribing to. But tucked in between was an envelope with a return address I didn't recognize. Inside was a handwritten note on cream-colored paper. "Dear Mrs. Dawson, I don't know if you remember me, but I rented your guest cottage 3 summers ago. At the time, I was going through a rough patch, jobless, nearly broke, and barely keeping my head above water. You charged me less than half the usual rent, and when I couldn't pay on time, you told me to just get back on my feet first. I wanted you to know. I did. I have a stable job now, a place of my own, and I think about your kindness often. You didn't just give me shelter. You gave me dignity. I hope life has been kind to you too. Thank you, more than I can ever say." It was signed simply, sincerely, Daniel. I sat for a long moment, the paper trembling slightly in my hands. The name stirred a faint memory. Tall, quiet, kept to himself, always paid in cash when he could. I hadn't thought about him in years. A warmth spread through me, the kind that wasn't about pride, but about being seen, not by the crowd that talks, but by someone who remembers in silence. The truth was, I hadn't stopped being generous. I'd just stopped offering it to people who treated it as a given. That shift had changed everything. When I went back to the garden, the lavender plants seemed brighter in the sun. I planted them in neat rows, spacing them just so, imagining how they'd look next summer, when they'd grown thick and full. I thought of Daniel's letter again, how it reached me without fanfare, without expectation, just gratitude for something I had done naturally. As I knelt there, my knees pressing into the soft earth, I realized this was what I had been missing during those years of giving to Melissa without boundaries. Not thanks in the form of words, though Daniel's were kind, but the feeling that what I gave mattered to the person receiving it, that it wasn't just consumed and forgotten, but woven into the fabric of their life. I finished the last plant, patted the soil around its base, and stood up slowly. My back ached, but in the good way work does, when it's for something you love. From the porch, I looked out again at the lake. The surface still hadn't broken, as though the whole world had agreed to pause for a while. The scent of lavender lingered in the air, mixing with the faint sweetness of the roses by the gate. I thought of Martha's words from the week before, how I had the right to my own ending. Maybe this was part of it. Not just keeping the house, but filling it with life on my terms. Choosing who I opened my door to. In the distance, a heron glided low across the water, its reflection doubling its grace. I felt the day settling into me, quiet and sure. As I went inside, I placed Daniel's letter in the drawer where I kept other small treasures. A pressed wildflower from my first walk on the property, a snapshot of the lake at sunset, a note from a neighbor thanking me for baking bread during a storm. Proof that kindness doesn't disappear, even if it changes direction. The lake remained still until dusk, and so did I. It was late afternoon when I saw Melissa's car pull up in front of the house. The lavender I'd planted just a week earlier swayed slightly in the breeze, as if even they sensed the tension walking up my driveway. She didn't knock right away. Instead, she stood on the porch, arms crossed, eyes scanning the lake behind me through the window. When she finally rapped her knuckles against the door, it was sharp and quick, like she wanted to get it over with. I opened the door, and for a brief moment, I thought I saw hesitation in her eyes, but it vanished almost instantly. "Can I come in?" she asked flatly. I stepped aside and let her in. She didn't sit, didn't look around at the home I'd built. Instead, she turned to face me, jaw tight. "So, is it true?" she said. "You're really choosing this house over me?" Her words hung in the air, like cold mist off the lake. They weren't a question. They were an accusation. I took a slow breath. "No," I said, my voice steady. "I'm choosing myself." Melissa blinked, as if she'd heard the sentence, but couldn't process it. "Yourself?" "Yes," I said, moving to place the kettle on the stove. "For years, Melissa, I gave you everything. Time, money, the roof over my head. I let my needs dissolve so yours could stand. And in return, you made it clear I wasn't welcome in your life, unless I was useful. That's not love. That's convenience." Her lips pressed into a thin line. "You make it sound like I never cared." I looked at her, really looked at her. She was still my daughter, but I couldn't ignore the way her gaze darted around the room, avoiding mine, searching for something to hold on to that would make her right. "Did you?" I asked quietly. Her eyes flickered for a moment, and I saw the faintest crack in her armor, but just as quickly, it was gone. "This is about Grayson," she said. "He thinks—" "This isn't about Grayson," I interrupted. "This is about me. I'm not handing over the keys to this house, Melissa. Not because I don't love you. but because I finally love myself enough to stop giving away what matters. There was silence, broken only by the faint whistle of the kettle beginning to heat. "You know," she said after a pause, "people will think you're selfish." I almost smiled. Let them. I've been selfless my whole life, and it nearly emptied me. If selfish means having something left for myself, I'll take it. Her eyes narrowed, but I caught the slight tremor in her hands. Whether it was anger or something else, I couldn't tell. "I guess that's it then," she said finally. "You've made your choice." I poured hot water into my teacup, the same white porcelain with the blue rim I'd carried out of her house the day she told me to leave. I set it on the counter between us. "Yes," I said, meeting her gaze. "I have." She didn't drink the tea I offered. She didn't say goodbye. She just walked out, her footsteps heavy against the wooden porch, the sound fading as her car engine started. I stood at the window for a while after she left, watching the trail of dust her tires kicked up along the road. The lake beyond remained calm, catching the light of the sinking sun. The tea had cooled by the time I took my first sip. It was still good, better even, because it was mine, in my home, on my terms. And though my chest felt heavy, I knew this was the kind of ache that comes with healing. I had chosen myself. And that choice, I realized, didn't close the door on love. It simply closed the door on losing myself in the name of it. It was 3 days after Melissa had walked out of my house. I wasn't expecting to see her again so soon. But that afternoon, as I was trimming the lavender along the porch, I heard the crunch of tires on gravel. Her car rolled to a stop. She stepped out slowly, not with the rigid anger of our last meeting, but with something I couldn't quite name. She didn't ask to come in this time. She stood on the bottom step, hands buried in the pockets of her jacket. I could see her eyes flitting toward the lake, toward the windows, toward the life I had built here without her. "I didn't come to fight," she said finally. I nodded. Good. For a moment, the only sounds were the soft lap of water against the shore and the wind moving through the lavender. Then I reached into my sweater pocket. My fingers closed around the worn piece of paper I had been keeping for 2 years. The $10 bill she'd pressed into my hand the day she told me to leave her house. I stepped down the porch and stood in front of her. Slowly, I held out my hand. She frowned. "What's this?" I didn't answer right away. I wanted to feel the moment, the way my thumb brushed against the edge of that bill, the way my heartbeat steadied instead of racing. When she reached out, I placed the money into her palm. Her skin was cool, almost cold, but my hand stayed warm against hers. I let my fingers linger for just a second longer than necessary, anchoring myself in the truth of what I was doing. "I'm giving this back to you," I said quietly. She looked down at it like it was some foreign object. "Why?" "Because it was never about the money," I said. "It was about what it meant. That day, you gave me $10 to send me away. Today, I'm giving it back to end that chapter. I don't carry this with me anymore. The shame, the hurt. This is me closing the circle." Her eyes flickered between mine and the bill in her hand. She didn't speak, but I saw her swallow hard, as though the weight of it was heavier than paper should be. "I'm not giving it back out of anger," I continued. "I'm giving it back because I don't need it to remind me of who I am. I know now. I've rebuilt myself since that day, and I'll keep living, whether or not you choose to be part of that." The breeze picked up, and for a moment, I thought she might let the bill slip from her hand and let the wind carry it away. But she kept it, fingers curling around it, eyes fixed somewhere on the ground between us. "You really mean it, don't you?" she said, her voice softer than I'd heard in years. "I do," I said. She looked as if she wanted to say something more, but whatever it was stayed locked behind her lips. I could see the battle in her eyes, pride wrestling with the possibility of humility. Finally, she tucked the bill into her pocket. "Well," she murmured, "I guess that's that." "Yes," I said, stepping back toward my porch. "That's that." I didn't watch her walk away this time. Instead, I turned back to my lavender, trimming away what was dead so the rest could bloom stronger. Behind me, I heard the faint sound of her car door closing, the engine starting, and then the tires crunching over gravel again. When the sound faded, I looked out at the lake. The surface was still, holding the reflection of the sky like a secret. I thought about how that bill had sat in my pocket all those months, not as a token of bitterness, but as a reminder of the moment my life cracked open. Now my hands were free. My pockets were lighter. My heart, lighter still. I went inside and poured myself a cup of tea. The same white porcelain cup with the blue rim sat warm in my hands as I took my first sip. And for the first time in a long time, it tasted purely of the present, not the past. I had returned the $10, but more importantly, I had returned to myself. The first light of morning spilled gently across the lake, turning the still water into a sheet of molten gold. I woke early, not because I had to, but because I wanted to catch this moment. Some mornings, the lake seemed shy, keeping its colors muted. But today, it shimmered boldly, as if reminding me that beauty doesn't ask for permission to exist. I padded into the kitchen, the cool wooden floorboards grounding me. The familiar ritual began. Kettle on, tea leaves ready, my white porcelain cup with the delicate blue rim waiting on the counter. The steam curled upward when I poured the hot water, releasing a scent that was both earthy and comforting. Cup in hand, I opened the front windows. The air was crisp, carrying the faint scent of lavender from the garden I'd tended with my own hands. I stepped closer, letting the morning sunlight touch my face, warming me from the outside in. I looked out over the lake, watching the ripples form and fade. In that reflection, I saw not just the sky and the water, but pieces of myself, fragments I'd thought were gone forever. "They took the house from me once," I whispered to no one but the dawn. "This time I keep it, and I keep myself." The truth of those words settled deep into my bones. I thought about the years I'd spent giving everything, time, money, energy, until I had nothing left for me. Back then, love had meant sacrifice without question. I believed that's what a mother was supposed to do. But now I understood something I hadn't before. Love without respect isn't love. It's exploitation dressed in sentiment. I leaned against the window frame, sipping my tea slowly, letting the warmth travel through me. It wasn't just the tea that calmed me. It was the knowledge that my life was mine again. Somewhere beyond the trees, Melissa was living her own version of the morning. Whether that included me or not was no longer the question that defined my day. I had stopped living in the shadow of someone else's approval. I glanced at the old rocking chair on the porch, the one I'd found at a yard sale last summer. Its wood was weathered, but the frame was sturdy, much like me. I imagined sitting there this evening, watching the sunset, maybe with a book in my lap and a blanket over my legs. The thought made me smile. For so long, my dreams had been about other people. what they needed, what they wanted, what they expected. Now, my dreams could be small, personal, even quiet, and still be enough. I took another sip of tea, feeling the porcelain warm against my palms. This cup had been with me through some of my hardest days. It had held comfort when nothing else could. Now, it felt like a companion for my best mornings, too. The lake shimmered again as the sun rose higher, the light scattering like jewels across the surface. I thought about how water never clings to one shape. It moves, it shifts, it adapts. Maybe that's what I was learning to do. To let go of the shape someone else had, forced me into and to flow toward the life I wanted. I set my cup down on the windowsill and let the breeze brush against my skin. Somewhere inside me, there was still a softness that hadn't been crushed by all that had happened. And that softness was mine to protect. I knew some people might look at my choice and think I was being stubborn, unforgiving. But they hadn't been here when the walls felt like they were closing in, when my own child's words cut sharper than any blade. They hadn't seen me rebuilding, brick by brick, my sense of self. As I finished my tea, I thought of something Martha had told me. You don't always have to slam the door. Sometimes you just keep it closed. I understood that now. The door between Melissa and me wasn't locked forever, but it also wasn't wide open for her to walk in and take what she pleased. I picked up my cup and turned from the window. My day would be simple. Tending the garden, maybe baking bread, perhaps a walk along the shoreline. But it would be mine, every moment of it. And to you, the one listening to my story now, I'll ask this. If it were you, would you open the door again? Or would you keep it closed?